Podfast is back. 6 minutes, one guest, and no time to waste. Dr. Chris Golby, the man who predicts workplace breakdowns before they even happen using AI. What is the most surprising pattern between when an individual or an organisation breaks?
Between when an individual and an organisation breaks. That's interesting. So that's at the tail end when culture has really become a problem. Culture's become toxic. Interestingly, Google did a study on this, and they found that they tried to identify the factors quantitatively as to what makes a good leader, so they could score them. And what they found was that the only predetermining factor as to whether a leader will succeed or not succeed was psychological safety. And when your employees don't feel safe, they can't speak up. And that is the biggest indicator of a toxic workplace. If you don't have psychological safety, then that will lead to that. If you do have psychological safety, leaders have different styles and different ways of interpreting things and different ways of going about their own leadership style. But if an organisation doesn't have psychological safety, it's the biggest indicator that leaders aren't leading in not a correct manner, but a way that is suitable and makes the organisation feel safe. And it's probably the biggest indicator that an individual is going to have problems or an organisation is going to break. So I directly correlate it to psychological safety. It's the biggest indicator. And outside of that, it becomes about the effectiveness of the leadership style for the organisation. Mm-hmm. And again, you can't pick a leader out of one organisation and expect them to have exactly the same impact in another organisation. Same as you wouldn't expect a footballer to lift out of one team and drop into another team and do exactly the same job, or in any sport exactly the same. They have their own styles and their own ways of working. It will change it. But if employees are silent and unable to speak up at all, the leader will never be able to have an effect on the organisation whatsoever. So psychological safety is the biggest determiner of whether you have a toxic culture or not.
Wow. What are the other culture red flags in a company to look out for?
Mental health and wellbeing of staff is obviously a massive one. So ability to spot potential burnout, potential stress. I would say are big flags, big indicators. Comms always comes up. Complete communication breakdown is a thing to be aware of and to spot. I would say be careful with that one though, because no matter what organisation you have, communication can always be better. So don't get caught up in the trap of thinking communication can always, or communication is the only problem around here. Communication is a big thing and you want to dig into what's behind the communication in the first place. So communication, mental health, well-being. I would say then leadership, how effective the leadership is, particularly how much the senior leadership team, the SLT, is taking on board that they own the culture of the organisation and it's not HR's responsibility.
Okay.
So do they own the culture? Do they drive it? Do they see the people as their responsibility? HR are the implementers of culture. That's okay. They can implement what the senior leadership team want, but the SLT is critical to driving forwards that culture and moving it forwards. Yeah. So I'd look at, that's probably three good areas. I mean, there's a heck of a lot of areas you can go into. And obviously the culture and our platform that we build, that's the whole point behind it, is we flag a heck of a lot. I think there's over 85 areas we flag around culture that indicates kind of what's going on, and we're able to dig into. But it's complicated. Yeah. But that's, I say, three very easy flags initially to spot.
Yeah, let's talk about culture. What do most people get wrong about culture?
So you know what? So the biggest thing I always see is when I speak to someone and say, how's the culture in the organisation? And they say, yeah, great.
Good.
And I say, so what are you doing about it? And they say, we don't need to do anything. Our culture's great. Now, the problem there, and the red flag I always have, is that's like a professional athlete turning around and saying, I'm now at the top of my game, so I can stop. The people who have the best cultures are the people who realise that needs work on it every day. The best definition of culture for me is how we get things done around here. So two companies producing the same product or delivering the same service will go about it in different ways just because of the nature of the fact that there's different people in the organisations who will handle it differently. And why you can't lift one people out of one organisation and drop them in the other. Going back to sports analogy, you know, that one rugby team players will be different to another rugby team. And so, but they're each trying to get to the same goal, and it may be inches or seconds that come into play in it.
Yeah.
But the way they go about it is completely different. And so the phrase is results equals operations times culture.
Okay, break that down.
So systems run businesses, people run systems.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've got your systems in place and the only thing you're focusing on is your systems and not your people, you're going to run into issues because you're not investing in the biggest asset that you have available as your people, and they're able to build on the systems that run there. So if results equals operations times culture, and systems run businesses and people run systems, then the biggest red flag is not noticing that you need to work on those systems all the time, because they will multiply how effective your operations are. So if you've got your operations running at 5, but your people are only running at half the capacity they're capable of, then immediately you drop to a 2.5.
Yeah.
And it is a direct multiplier. So if you've got people turning up to work every day who don't want to be there, your operations, no matter how efficient they are, will always be affected by that multiplier. So how do you drive that forward? So the people who think we only have to work on operations and we can leave our culture because it's okay or it's good or people say it's great, have a problem. Because the fact is the people who are world class and the people who understand it realise that what gets measured gets improved. And the top athletes, the top companies in the world will realise it's all about marginal gains.
Right.
So how do we get that culture that's 0.5% better than our competitors across 100 different areas?
And you go from hiring a few people to hiring up to past 30 people, and you've mentioned this culture cliff that happens later on. But at that point, you're hiring loads of people. What are the key hiring mistakes that you've seen or other experience?
I suppose organisations in that growth stage, they go through 5 stages of growth, and there's pretty much precise numbers on this. So they're 15, 30, 50 and 100. And what tends to happen is in the initial stages up to 15, you're very culturally driven. You don't want to insert too much process because you need the right senior people around you at that time with a high level experience to be able to operate on their own, because you're relying on culture to get to 15 people. As you start to near that space of 15, there'll be a cry out for some process because everything's beginning to get a bit messy. If you try to insert the process too early, it's too much process because things change too fast.
Okay.
So the process is not useful. You rely on culture, but all of a sudden that's something you need process. You insert the process, and what you start to do is employ more junior staff at that point to get that into play and take it to 30.
Right.
Now, the biggest mistake we see at 30 is actually you now need to flip the dial as well when you've gone all the way over to being more process driven, is you now need to actually remove a lot of the processes and actually go back to being culturally driven.
Oh, wow.
And what we know is if you try to jump to being fully cultural driven and miss the 15 to 30 gap, you won't get to 30 in the first place.
Oh, really?
And you have to remove the processes and get rid of that. So one of the mistakes we see is people at 15 trying to put processes in place for a 100-person company. It just simply will not work because you're going to have to put things into place and then remove them. And then insert a new set to get from 30 to 50 and then remove them. So at 30 to 50, you're going back to culturally driven.
Yeah.
Because what you're looking to do is you've got a little bit of process in there, but you're going back to having, say, 3 mini companies, the same as you would at 0 to 15. And you're relying on the culture of those 3 teams within the company now. So that kind of 30 is the first time you'll have almost departments within the company.
Yeah.
They're now mini companies on their own, and if you insert too much process, the bits within departments are changing too quickly, and you're having the same effect you had at 0 to 15. Then at 50 to 100, you've all of a sudden got the departments that have now grown big, and guess what happens? Everybody's crying out for process again.
Brilliant.
So you've got the red tape having to be inserted. So you need to insert processes, and then each department now goes through the same process you do at 15 to 30, and become a representative of what the company was as a whole at 15 to 30, between 50 and 100. At 100, it gets real interesting because that's where we see most companies stutters. There are tons of companies around that are stuck at 100 people, and it's because it's the first time in the growth pattern you have to balance the needle between being fully culturally driven and fully process driven.
Yeah.
And it's the first time you have to start really measuring and tweaking the dial on a day-to-day basis and really understanding. And if you don't have that in place to be constantly measuring the balance, we see people go up to 120 and come straight back down again. Everything has to be right at that point, and that's the hardest leap to get over, is that 100 people spot. And we see those exact patterns, and the research shows those exact patterns happen.
If I'm a leader, then what one thing should I focus on to get that art right?
Beginning to understand what makes you initially from an individual leader point of view. Culture starts at the top, and the first place to start it is the founders and the CEOs to look inwards, not outwards, and to address their views of culture, their views of dealing with people, how they see themselves in the organisation, truly understanding their own values, and also being comfortable with being vulnerable.
Okay.
So how they share their own vulnerability. Gone are the days of standing at the top of organisation and showing no weakness. Those sort of characters don't work anymore. People see past them. The ability to show vulnerability is critical.
Okay.
That starting to look inwards.
No, thank you very much, Chris.
No problem.
We have a closing tradition on this podcast,
Okay.
which is where the guest, regardless of who they are, answers this one question. And that is, what is one message that you've never sent but you wish everyone would receive?
Business and organisations were designed to make people's lives better in the first place. So why is it that business and organisations are causing some of the biggest mental health problems and some of the biggest issues with people amongst the current generations? Business should be a force for good in the first place because that's what it was set up to do, was to improve society. And how much do we take the time to think about that?
That's a brilliant message. Chris, thank you so much for your time. I applaud what you're doing with culture and changing things, and it's absolutely fascinating, I think, not only from our perspective, but for anyone here at Mill Street who's also working on building their own culture. So thank you for your time. And
yeah, thanks.
I hope you
Great being here.